Hello from the Channel studio in London and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches, the program that takes you around the world in 25 minutes. I'm Teniola Oyetayo. On the program this week, US President Joe Biden makes a surprise visit to Ukraine ahead of one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion. Plus, Russian President Vladimir Putin accuses Western countries of igniting and sustaining the war in Ukraine. Just days before the one-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine, US President Joe Biden traveled to Kyiv in an unprecedented trip to an active war zone, visiting a memorial for fallen Ukrainians alongside President Volodymyr Zelensky. Announcing more military aid for Ukraine, the US president vowed to support Kyiv against Russia for as long as it takes. Air raid sirens blaring in Ukraine's capital on Monday, at the same time that US President Joe Biden landed there for a surprise visit, and just days before the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion. President Biden was visiting a war memorial at St. Michael's Cathedral with President Volodymyr Zelensky as it happened. There were no reports of Russian missile or airstrikes in Kyiv, but it underlines the grinding nature of the war, which has seen no major changes on the ground for months. President Biden had taken a 10-hour train journey from Poland to reach Kyiv in secret. According to the White House, Russia was informed about the trip a few hours before President Biden's departure. The US president used the trip to announce $500 million in new military aid to Ukraine, including air defense radars, weapons for taking out armored vehicles, and artillery ammunition.
Putin thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. As you know, Mr. President, I said to you in the beginning, he's counting on us not sticking together. He was counting on the inability to keep NATO united. He was counting on us not to be able to bring in others on the side of Ukraine. He thought he could outlast us. I don't think he's thinking that right now. God knows what he's thinking, but I don't think he's thinking that. That dark night, 1 year ago, the world was literally at the time bracing for the fall of Kyiv. Seems like a lot longer ago than a year, but think back to that year. Perhaps even the end of Ukraine. You know, 1 year later, Kyiv stands, and Ukraine stands. Democracy stands. The Americans stand with you, and the world stands with you. Together, we've committed nearly 700 tanks and thousands of armored vehicles, 1,000 artillery systems, more than 2 million rounds of artillery ammunition, more than 50 advanced launch rocket systems, anti-ship and air defense systems, all defend Ukraine, and that doesn't count the other $500 million we're announcing with you today and tomorrow. That's going to be coming your way.
Allies have recently voiced concern that Ukraine may be burning through ammo faster than the West can supply it. The US president made no mention of donating Western fighter jets, which Ukraine has been pushing for, and if granted, would be another upgrade in firepower after the recent pledges of modern Western tanks. President Zelensky, however, said that he and Joe Biden discussed long-range weapons. This could be warplanes or better missile systems. So far, the West has resisted both of these on fears that they would be used to strike deep into Russia and even further escalate the war.
Mr. President, that is a huge moment of supporting of the Ukraine, and what can I say? I really appreciate that President Biden, American society, being from the very beginning of this tragedy, from the very beginning of this full-scale war, from the first days being together with us. First phone call of supporting was from White House to Ukraine, and what we have to do to stop the war, to have success in this war, to make Ukraine more stronger, and how to win this year.
Meanwhile, as President Biden visited Ukraine, China's foreign minister headed to Russia on the final stop of his 8-day Europe tour. China has so far remained neutral in the war, despite its close relationship to Moscow. The West fears it could begin supplying Russia with its own weapons. Meanwhile, a day after the U.S. president traveled to Kyiv in a surprise visit to meet his Ukrainian counterpart, Russian President Vladimir Putin gave a State of the Nation address in Moscow, where he spoke at length about the ongoing war in Ukraine. In his 2-hour speech, the Russian leader accused the West of igniting and sustaining the war in Ukraine. He also said Russia must stand ready to resume nuclear weapons tests if Washington does so. In a State of the Nation address ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion, President Vladimir Putin blamed the West for provoking the war and escalating it, saying the US and its allies sought limitless power.
Responsibility for fomenting the Ukrainian conflict, for its escalation and for the increasing number of victims lies entirely with Western elites.
President Putin also said the West hasn't succeeded in defeating the Russian economy with sanctions. In the only major announcement, he said he was suspending Russia's participation in the New START Treaty, a major arms control agreement with the United States. It's the last remaining nuclear arms deal between Moscow and Washington, and it was extended for 5 years in 2021.
Mr. Secretary, Putin announced today he was...
The U.S. has criticized the announcement as irresponsible.
The announcement by Russia that it's suspending participation in New START is deeply unfortunate and irresponsible. We'll be watching carefully to see what Russia actually does. We'll, of course, make sure that in any event we are postured appropriately for the security of our own country and that of our allies.
NATO has also urged Moscow against the move, while Kyiv and its allies have denounced President Putin's speech as propaganda.
It is President Putin who started this imperial war of conquest. It is Putin who keeps escalating the war. He thought he could destroy Ukraine and divide us, but he underestimated the determination of the Ukrainian people to defend their homeland, and he underestimated our unity. 1 year since he launched the Russian invasion, we see no sign that President Putin is preparing for peace. On the contrary, as he made clear today, he is preparing for more war. More nuclear weapons and less arms control makes the world more dangerous. And that's the reason why in NATO we have worked so hard to engage Russia on issues related to arms control, and why NATO allies have supported the New START. And also why I'm calling on Russia today to reconsider its decision to suspend its participation in the New START agreement.
Hours after President Putin's speech, the US president, while in Poland, laid out his view of the war in Ukraine as a battle for democracy.
Well, I just come from a visit to Kyiv, and I can report Kyiv stands strong. Kyiv stands proud. It stands tall. And most important, it stands free. Appetites of the autocrat cannot be appeased. They must be opposed. Autocrats only understand one word: no. no, no. No, you will not take my country. No, you will not take my freedom. No, you will not take my future. A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire will never be able to ease the people's love of liberty. Brutality will never grind down the will of the free. And Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia. Never.
The leaders' competing speeches came ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Russia has sustained huge losses in the war, but is expected to launch a new offensive in the spring. The United Nations says at least 8,000 civilians have been killed in Ukraine since the war began. The official UN tally includes 2,000 civilian deaths in Mariupol, which was home to around 450,000 people, before Russia laid siege to it for 3 months and blasted it to the ground. Russia denies intentionally targeting civilians in what it calls a special military operation. And a year since Russia launched its full-scale invasion, signs of calm resilience have become increasingly commonplace in Ukraine's capital. Despite fears of attacks and the constant sound of air raid sirens, residents have learned to press on. The war has killed thousands, displaced millions, and disrupted global food and energy markets with no end in sight. From Kyiv's nightlife to schools and metro stations to city tours, despite the threat of missile and drone attacks, signs of calm resilience have become increasingly commonplace in Ukraine's capital. The city has been back under fire since last autumn, part of what Kyiv says is a Kremlin campaign to break Ukrainians' will. Russia denies targeting civilians and says its attacks are designed to weaken Ukraine's military. Metro worker Tamara says the first days of the invasion were the hardest, when the metro system transformed into a sprawling network of shelters. She didn't go home for 3 weeks.
Those first days were the hardest because people were very confused and scared. Everyone was very worried, especially parents who were worried about their children.
Much of the city of around 3 million people sheltered indoors and underground, including school teacher Olena's high school class. To avoid lessons being disrupted by yet another Russian attack, she quickly moved her class underground when the air raid siren sounded.
The war has been going on for 9 years, but for the last 8 years, it hasn't impacted the lives of all people. Now it is present in everyone's life. Our children are children of war. We have learned to appreciate every single moment.
An above-ground city guide, Yulia, and her predominantly Ukrainian clients carried on under extraordinary circumstances. She has since tailored her tours to include bomb shelters, and business is booming. Last year, Yulia conducted 175 tours, having resumed in April.
There could be air alarms during the tour. We've learned to understand what various alarms mean. Objects taking off, objects flying towards us. We'll look at what is happening and make decisions accordingly. There are shelters on our way, so we'll decide what to do. God willing, everything will be fine.
The thirst of normality is also a feature of Kyiv's nightlife. Despite the risk of attacks, revelers come out to enjoy a few drinks and concerts before an 11 p.m. curfew takes effect. Events have also been adjusted to suit the times. Entry fees have been replaced by donations for the military, which already exceed $100,000. Performances and exhibitions are also often linked to the war.
Admittance to all our concerts is free. We collect donations for the armed forces of Ukraine, conduct auctions and exhibitions. We sell pictures. This helps our bartenders, waiters and cooks. All of us understand why we live here and what we can do for this country.
Ukraine appears to be heading towards a long war marked by clashes like the battle for the eastern city of Bakhmut and by Russia's relentless bombing of Ukrainian infrastructure. Many Ukrainians say they will not be safe until they win the war. When Foreign Dispatches returns, another strong quake hits near Turkey-Syria border, rattling the devastated region. More details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on the program. Rescuers this week were once again searching for people trapped under rubble in Turkey after another earthquake hit the country, killing at least 6 people. A 6.4 magnitude tremor struck near the city of Antakya, near the border with Syria, where massive quakes devastated both countries earlier this month. The earlier quakes killed at least 44,000 people, with tens of thousands more left homeless.
A familiar sense of terror was felt by those on the Turkey-Syria border as the ground began to shake beneath their feet for the third time in a fortnight. The quake caused people to rush to the streets in the cold again, sleeping in cars and shelters, fully aware of what could happen and conscious of what they had survived the last time. The 6.4 magnitude quake occurred on Monday near Antakya and was felt in Syria, Egypt and Lebanon. Turkey's Disaster and Emergency Management Authority said it was followed by 90 aftershocks. Around half a dozen people were killed in the latest earthquake to strike the area. This dashcam footage shows the moment the disaster hit in the southern Turkish province of Hatay. Havat Tunke was living in a tent set up in the center of Antakya when this latest earthquake hit. The previous shakes left her and her children homeless.
I can't sleep at night. Is the same thing going to keep happening again and again? We are very scared. I haven't slept well in over a week.
Scared by the previous quakes, many are afraid to return to their homes and are choosing to sleep outside instead.
We are scared, so scared to go back home. We stay on the streets, now even in the cold, because of these tremors. We can't stay inside. This is the situation now.
The fresh earthquake comes just 2 weeks after Turkey's worst quake in modern history left at least 44,000 people dead and tens of thousands homeless. Meanwhile, in a visit to Turkey on Monday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced $100 million in humanitarian aid, saying that America would help with earthquake recovery for as long as it takes. It is one of several countries to have offered their help in the wake of the first earthquake.
We are here to stand with the people of Turkey and Syria in the wake of this devastating earthquake. I just had a chance to fly over Hatay to see some of the devastation. We've had about $85 billion worth of assistance poured in immediately for housing, water, and food, and medicine, and clothing. All that in the immediate days following the earthquake. Today I can announce that we will be putting in another $100 million to assist those who are so desperately in need.
The World Health Organization estimates that some 26 million people across both Turkey and Syria need humanitarian aid.
Meanwhile, medics in Syria's rebel-held region say the earthquake, which hit the region on February the 6th, has proved the most difficult challenge yet, overwhelming health facilities already battered by more than a decade of conflict.
This is what's left of the Al-Dana hospital in the northwest of Syria after a deadly earthquake hit 2 weeks ago. The facility is no longer operational. The words unsafe and unfit for work have been painted in red next to the entrance. Medics say the quake is a new blow to the health services already battered by more than a decade of war in the country.
The first moments following the earthquake were catastrophic in the hospital, as it was full of patients and medical personnel. All patients were discharged to nearby hospitals.
Nurse Ibrahim Zidan works in another hospital nearby. He endured many desperate moments in the rebel-held region, including being trapped in rubble after shelling destroyed a hospital where he was working. But he says the earthquake on February 6th has proved the most difficult challenge yet for medics. CCTV footage showed the moment when the quake struck the Al-Dana hospital. Zidan oversaw the evacuation of infants from the hospital. He said he had children on oxygen but could not find a space for them because all hospitals in the area were full.
The earthquake was the hardest thing we have ever experienced because everything was lost. In our intensive care unit, we treat children, and so electricity and oxygen are a must. We had children on oxygen, so we couldn't provide for them nor find an available place as all hospitals were full. The earthquake was the hardest thing we have ever experienced.
More than 4,500 people have been reported killed and at least 8,300 people injured by the quake in northwest Syria. That's according to the United Nations. The country has been fractured by civil war since 2011, and hospitals in the rebel-held northwest have been shelled repeatedly in the war. In 2019, more than 60 medical facilities were struck in a 6-month period in northwest Idlib area. Until the quake, the Al-Dana hospital had been serving a region with a population of some 600,000 people. The biggest challenge now is that the hospital will be out of operation for a month for repairs, putting yet more pressure on the surrounding hospitals.
And finally, let's head over to the United Arab Emirates. A few days after Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari engaged his UAE counterpart on the lingering diplomatic issues between both countries, Nigerian investors resident in the Middle Eastern country, all of whom have been impacted, have gathered to deliberate on the way forward at a forum attended by over 60 concerned persons. Our correspondent, Maiwa Adigoke, has more on this.
Well over 3 months since the UAE slammed a total ban on Nigerian visas, over 60 Nigerian investors in the country are here at the second edition of the Nigerian Business Owners Forum to discuss common challenges as well as the task of repairing a bad reputation and finding a way forward.
So the branding is not just going to come from us, it's going to come from everybody.
In attendance are leading investors, community leaders, representative of the Nigerian High Commission, young entrepreneurs, and members of the UAE business community, all attentive as a select panel kicks off the conversation.
It is good that we are sitting and talking about these things because if we do not find a way out of it, either governmentally and within our own perspective, we do not know what will be lying here ahead of us in years to come.
Only we can help ourselves. This is my point of view. Forget about even, honestly, the embassy or the government. This one said that. All these councils that I mentioned, they are grouping together and they're finding ways to engage with even the embassies and the governments and the authorities, and they're helping themselves and their own communities. It's about time we did the same. Otherwise, we might as well pack up and go somewhere else.
I've seen Nigerians do great stuff here. I can't blame this country. I don't think we've had very good PR. I don't know what is going on politically, what is causing this between UAE. This is beyond all of us. Maybe this might be the beginning of a process to bring in Nigerians like me and you who will be good ambassadors.
It's the first and most inclusive business forum ever recorded, and guest speaker Nina Olatoke points out the need to come together as a community. Many here have spent as much as 20 years doing business and are eager to support the country's economic vision.
We have to jig and reframe what that word community means to us. And so it's not about tribe, it's about the heart to connect.
As the mic is passed around and others air their thoughts on the situation and how to make progress, there is a consensus that the next step for the community is to register a business council with the authorities through which they can engage the UAE and get support as investors. A representative of the Nigerian Embassy pledges the support of the High Commission towards any progressive action taken by the community.
Kickstart. Always inform. Like today, we're here. Call us tomorrow again, we'll be here.
At the end of the day, members of the community say there is need to continue meeting and engaging in hopes that the united group capable of engaging the UAE emerges.
And that's the program today, but remember our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Oyetayo. Bye for now.